The conflict in Ukraine, which escalated to full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022, remains one of the most significant geopolitical crises of the 21st century. Understanding the actual dynamics of international support, diplomatic efforts, and policy debates provides essential context for evaluating claims about the war and potential paths toward resolution. The United States has provided substantial support to Ukraine since the 2022 Russian invasion. This support includes military assistance in the form of weapons systems, ammunition, and training, economic assistance to help Ukraine's government continue functioning, and humanitarian aid for displaced persons and affected civilians. The total value of U.S. assistance has reached tens of billions of dollars across multiple supplemental appropriations passed by Congress. Military assistance to Ukraine has included various categories of equipment. Anti-tank weapons, including Javelin missiles, proved crucial in the early months of the war when Ukrainian forces defended against Russian armored advances. Artillery systems, including M7 howitzers and HIMARS rocket systems, provided Ukraine with precision strike capabilities. Air defense systems, including Patriot missile batteries, helped protect Ukrainian cities and infrastructure from Russian missile attacks. Armored vehicles, ammunition, small arms, and various other equipment categories have also been provided. The provision of military assistance involves complex processes. Congress must appropriate funds. The Department of Defense coordinates with Ukrainian military officials to identify priority needs. Equipment must be sourced either from existing U.S. stocks through Presidential Drawdown Authority or purchased from manufacturers through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. Training programs teach Ukrainian forces to operate and maintain new equipment. Logistics networks deliver equipment to Ukraine while maintaining operational security. Debates about Ukraine assistance have occurred throughout the conflict. Supporters argue that helping Ukraine resist Russian aggression serves U.S. interest by deterring future aggression, supporting the rules-based international order, and demonstrating U.S. commitment to allies. They note that the assistance represents a small fraction of the U.S. defense budget, while significantly degrading Russian military capabilities without U.S. troops in combat. They emphasize that Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty and territorial integrity against an invasion violating international law. Critics raise various concerns about the level and duration of assistance. Some question whether the financial costs are sustainable given domestic priorities. Some worry about potential escalation risks if certain weapon systems are provided. Some argue that Ukraine should negotiate a settlement rather than continue fighting indefinitely. Some believe European nations should bear more of the burden. These debates occur within Congress, among foreign policy experts, and in public discourse. NATO's role in the Ukraine conflict has been significant but carefully calibrated. NATO is a defensive alliance whose Article 5 collective defense commitment applies to member states. Ukraine is not a NATO member, so Article 5 does not apply. However, NATO members have provided substantial bilateral assistance to Ukraine. NATO has strengthened its eastern flank by deploying additional forces to member states bordering Russia and Ukraine. The alliance has increased defense spending across member nations in response to the changed security environment. Ukraine's potential NATO membership remains a contentious issue. Ukraine has expressed aspirations to join NATO. NATO's 2008 Bucharest summit stated that Ukraine would eventually become a member, though without specifying a timeline. Russia has opposed Ukrainian NATO membership and cited it as one justification for its aggression, though this justification is rejected by Ukraine, NATO, and most international observers who note that sovereign nations have the right to choose their own security arrangements. The question of when or how Ukraine might join NATO involves complex considerations. NATO membership requires consensus among all current members. The process typically involves meeting various political, economic, and military criteria. Accession during an ongoing conflict would be unprecedented and raise questions about invoking Article 5 obligations. However, some argue that providing a clear membership pathway could enhance deterrence and provide Ukraine with security guarantees. European nations have played crucial roles in supporting Ukraine. The European Union has provided substantial financial assistance, imposed extensive economic sanctions on Russia, accepted millions of Ukrainian refugees, and work to reduce energy dependence on Russia. Individual European nations have provided military equipment, training, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic support. The United Kingdom, Poland, and Baltic states have been particularly active supporters. Germany initially showed reluctance, but has significantly increased its support over time. Peace negotiations and diplomatic efforts have occurred at various points during the conflict. Early talks in Belarus and Turkey during spring 2022 did not produce agreements. The reasons for failure are disputed, with various parties blaming the other side for inflexibility. Since then, formal negotiations have been limited. Ukraine has outlined its position through President Zelensky's peace formula, which includes restoration of territorial integrity, accountability for war crimes, and security guarantees. Russia has demanded recognition of its territorial claims and Ukrainian neutrality. The question of what a realistic peace settlement might involve generates significant debate. Ukraine's position emphasizes restoration of full territorial integrity, including Crimea and all occupied territories, accountability for Russian aggression, and security guarantees to prevent future attacks. Russia's stated positions have included recognition of its annexation of Ukrainian territories and Ukrainian neutrality. The gap between these positions remains enormous. Various proposals and frameworks have been discussed by different actors. Some suggest freezing the conflict along current lines while pursuing a longer-term settlement. Others propose peacekeeping forces in certain areas. Some emphasize security guarantees for Ukraine, whether through NATO membership, bilateral agreements, or other mechanisms. Some focus on the sequencing of steps, including ceasefire, withdrawal, political settlement, and normalization. None of these proposals have achieved consensus among the key parties. The viability of different settlement frameworks depends on multiple factors. Ukraine's willingness to accept terms is essential, since any settlement imposed over Ukrainian objections would lack legitimacy and sustainability. Russia's willingness to negotiate in good faith rather than using talks to consolidate gains matters enormously. The position of Ukraine's supporters, including the US and European nations, affects Ukraine's negotiating position and Russia's calculations. The military situation on the ground influences what terms each side considers acceptable. Public opinion in Ukraine strongly opposes ceding territory to Russia. Polls consistently show that large majorities of Ukrainians oppose territorial concessions, even in exchange for peace. This public sentiment constrains Ukrainian leadership's ability to accept terms involving territorial losses. The Ukrainian position holds that accepting territorial losses would reward aggression, encourage future attacks, and betray Ukrainian citizens living under occupation. American public opinion on Ukraine assistance has evolved during the conflict. Initial support was strong, with bipartisan majorities favoring assistance. Over time, some polling has shown declining support or increased concern about costs and duration. However, polling results vary significantly depending on question wording, with higher support when assistance is framed as helping Ukraine defend itself versus when framed as open-ended commitment. Republican and Democratic voters show different levels of support, with Democrats generally more supportive, though significant Republican support exists. Congressional dynamics around Ukraine assistance reflect these divisions. Major assistance packages have passed with bipartisan support, though some Republicans have opposed or sought to reduce funding. The December 2023 supplemental appropriations request became entangled with negotiations over U.S. border security, illustrating how Ukraine policy intersects with domestic political issues. Despite debates, substantial assistance has continued to flow, though sometimes with delays during congressional negotiations. Within U.S. foreign policy circles, debates about Ukraine policy involve multiple dimensions. Some emphasize the importance of ensuring Ukraine can achieve favorable terms in any eventual settlement by providing sufficient military support. Others worry about escalation risks and advocate for encouraging negotiations. Some focus on ensuring European nations bear appropriate burdens. Some emphasize the precedent that Ukraine's outcome will set for other potential conflicts, including regarding Taiwan. The relationship between Ukraine policy and U.S.-China competition provides important context. Many strategists view the Ukraine conflict through the lens of great power competition. Demonstrating resolve and supporting Ukraine is seen as signaling U.S. commitment to allies facing potential Chinese pressure. Conversely, some argue that resources devoted to Ukraine detract from preparing for potential Indo-Pacific contingencies. These debates reflect broader questions about U.S. strategic priorities and resource allocation. Russia's position and capabilities significantly affect the conflict's trajectory. Russia has sustained enormous military losses in equipment and personnel. Its economy faces extensive sanctions, though it has proven more resilient than some predicted. Domestic Russian support for the war appears mixed with limited open opposition, but also limited enthusiasm. Russia has demonstrated willingness to accept high costs to pursue its objectives. Whether Russia's position will change due to military setbacks, economic pressure, or domestic factors remains uncertain. The conflict's military situation has evolved through distinct phases. The initial Russian invasion in February 2022 aimed for rapid victory, but was repelled from Kiev and northern Ukraine. Ukrainian counteroffensives in fall 2022 recaptured significant territory in Kharkiv and Kherson regions. The conflict has since largely stabilized into attritional warfare, with both sides conducting offensive operations, but neither achieving decisive breakthroughs. Both sides face challenges including ammunition supplies, personnel, and equipment. International law and norms bear significantly on the conflict. Russia's invasion violates the UN Charter's prohibition on the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of sovereign states. The principle that borders cannot be changed by force represents a foundational element of the post-World War II international order. Allowing successful territorial conquest through aggression could encourage similar actions elsewhere. However, international law provides limited enforcement mechanisms when major powers violate norms. War crimes and accountability issues have emerged throughout the conflict. Evidence has documented various violations, including attacks on civilians, indiscriminate bombardment of civilian areas, torture, forced deportation, and other abuses. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Russian officials, including President Putin. Various mechanisms are documenting violations for potential future accountability. However, holding powerful actors accountable for war crimes faces significant practical obstacles. The humanitarian impact of the conflict has been devastating. Tens of thousands of combatants and civilians have been killed, though exact numbers remain uncertain. Millions of Ukrainians have fled the country as refugees. Additional millions are internally displaced. Critical infrastructure, including power, water, and heating systems, has been damaged by Russian attacks. Economic damage to Ukraine runs to hundreds of billions of dollars. The psychological trauma affecting the population will have long-lasting effects. Energy and food security dimensions of the conflict have global implications. Ukraine is a major grain exporter, and the conflict disrupted global food supplies, particularly affecting vulnerable populations in Africa and the Middle East. Russia is a major energy supplier, and European efforts to reduce Russian energy dependence have caused economic disruption, though Europe has largely successfully diversified supplies. These global spillover effects illustrate how the conflict's impacts extend well beyond Ukraine and Russia. The role of nuclear weapons deserves careful consideration. Russia has made various nuclear threats during the conflict, attempting to deter Western support for Ukraine. However, Russia has not used nuclear weapons despite suffering major military setbacks. The United States and NATO have sought to balance supporting Ukraine with avoiding direct military confrontation with Russia that could escalate to nuclear use. Managing these escalation risks while providing meaningful support to Ukraine represents an ongoing challenge. Looking toward potential outcomes, several possibilities exist, though predicting which will occur remains difficult. Ukraine might achieve significant military success, forcing Russia to negotiate from weakness. Russia might achieve military breakthroughs, forcing Ukraine to accept unfavorable terms. The conflict might freeze into a prolonged stalemate with periodic escalations. Some combination of battlefield developments, economic pressures, and diplomatic initiatives might create conditions for a negotiated settlement. The outcome will depend on military capabilities, economic resilience, political will, and diplomatic efforts on all sides. The long-term implications of the conflict will extend far beyond its immediate resolution. The war has fundamentally altered European security arrangements and attitudes toward defense spending and military preparedness. It has affected relations between Western democracies and authoritarian states. It has implications for future conflicts over territory and sovereignty. It has demonstrated both the possibilities and limits of different forms of international support for countries facing aggression. For the United States specifically, the conflict has raised important questions that will shape future foreign policy. How should the U.S. balance commitments to allies with other priorities? What forms of support are most effective in helping partners resist aggression? How can escalation risks be managed while still providing meaningful assistance? What precedents does U.S. action or inaction set for future crises? How should the costs of international engagement be balanced against the costs of disengagement? These questions lack simple answers but will shape American grand strategy going forward. The Ukraine conflict represents a test case for how the United States responds to major aggression by a nuclear-armed power against a partner nation. The outcome and the manner in which it's achieved will influence how allies, partners, and adversaries view American commitment and capability for years to come. Understanding the conflict requires moving beyond simplified narratives to grasp the genuine complexities involved. The war involves real human suffering on an enormous scale. It poses difficult trade-offs between competing values and interests. It requires balancing short-term humanitarian concerns with long-term strategic considerations. It involves uncertain assessments about military capabilities, political will, and diplomatic possibilities. Navigating these complexities demands careful analysis, openness to evidence, and recognition that even well-intentioned people may reach different conclusions about optimal policies. For citizens seeking to understand Ukraine policy and evaluate claims about it, several principles prove helpful. Seek information from multiple credible sources rather than relying on any single source. Distinguish between factual reporting of events and interpretive analysis or opinion. Recognize that legitimate experts may disagree about optimal policies. Understand that situations evolve, requiring policy to adapt. Maintain skepticism toward claims that seem designed primarily to provoke emotional responses. Focus on verifiable facts while acknowledging genuine uncertainties. The conflict in Ukraine will likely be studied by historians, strategists, and policymakers for generations. It represents a major test of the international order, alliance cohesion, economic interdependence, and the use of military force in pursuit of political objectives. How it concludes and what lessons are drawn from it will significantly influence international relations in the decades ahead.